Welcome to Installing Backup Exec 2012. If you're following along in the book, I'm in Lesson 2. Topics that we'll cover are how to install a Backup Exec server, how to use the admin console, just a general description, and then we're going to go through how to update Backup Exec. This is using Live Update to update the binaries. The last topic that we'll cover is upgrading from older versions of Backup Exec to Backup Exec 2012 and the path that you must follow to do that upgrade. So let's start with installing Backup Exec as a general installation. Before you ever get this thing installed, you do have to meet certain requirements. Does the server meet hardware requirements? The best answer to that is to go out and look at Symantec.com support for the hardware compatibility list, or HCL. You can also look for the software compatibility list, that is SCL, to show whether or not we will install on your hardware. As just a couple of thoughts on this, if you are backing up 64-bit systems, it is a best practice to have a 64-bit backup server. 64-bit is only required if you are backing up Exchange 2010, Hyper-V, or you want to do data deduplication. Everywhere else, it is recommended that if you are backing up 64-bit systems, that you also have a 64-bit server. So this is a gray line as an industry right now. We're in the process of moving from 32 to 64. If you try to use a 32-bit server to back up 64-bit systems, it will run slow. There's no getting around it. So just keep that in mind. If this is a brand new installation, you can just do the install. If it's an upgrade, we'll follow those steps later. You must also decide where you want the Backup Exec database. The default for the Backup Exec database is to put it on SQL Express on the C drive. So the default path to the Backup Exec database is C:\program files Symantec Backup Exec data. We'll see that path later. Best networking practices are that data goes anywhere but the C drive. So you can redirect that default path as part of the installation. You can also redirect the database into fully licensed SQL, so you do not have to install in SQL Express if you do not choose to. Third-party backup software is not a good idea. Check the software compatibility list, but I personally have yet to see any two different pieces of backup software play nice together. They just don't. So it's best if you avoid that if at all possible. As far as the hardware environment, is your device supported? That's listed on the hardware compatibility list. But as a general rule of thumb, if the operating system can see the device, Backup Exec can probably write to it. Not always, but just as a general guideline. If you look at Device Manager and you see a question mark for that device, that's okay, because during the installation, Backup Exec will install the appropriate drivers. So the fact that it's just the operating system sees it is a good start. It is always best to check the hardware compatibility list, though. The device has to be operational. You have to be able to communicate with it. Most of that can be tested during the backup if you know that the device is supported. As far as the administration and having the necessary files, there are two sets of files that you're going to need to do this installation. One of them is the download of the installation DVD. Symantec no longer sends out physical DVDs unless you request them. We expect you to download the ISO for the installation. So you'll need to have that download handy. You will also need to have your Symantec license keys. You can either type in a license key, but when you register your license key, Symantec will send you an email with a license file attached. This file is a file that will have an SLF extension. It stands for Symantec License File. And you may have to type in many license keys because you license the core product and the library expansion option and 3 different agents for agents and applications and databases. So instead of typing in all those license keys, we send you one file with an SLF extension, and you can just import that file. And that way you have all the license keys, you don't have to worry about it. So you do need those 2 pieces. You either need to type in license keys or have the ISO. The third piece that you need from an administrative standpoint is you're going to have a Windows account that has rights not only to read what you want to back up, but more importantly have the right to write to where you need to restore. If all you can do is back up, it does you no good because you can't recover. So you're going to have an administrative account that has both read and write privileges to whatever data that you wish to back up. A best practice is that that account be a member of domain administrators. If the account is a member of backup operators, it has read rights but no write rights. So it is a best practice if it is a member of domain administrators, if at all possible. If you are backing up Exchange, you must also have rights to be an Exchange administrator. In Windows, that means you have to be a member of enterprise admins, not just domain admins. SQL can be installed so that it is in Windows mode or in mixed mode, which means that you'll have to have a separate SQL account. And we'll take a look at all of these specialty licensing, specialty rights accounts when we go through those individual lessons. So we will talk about the rights that you need to back up and restore Exchange, SQL, and SharePoint. You will also have to have, if you're backing up Linux boxes, you'll have to have an account that has either root or super user access to those Linux machines to be able to read and write. Finding those accounts can be the challenging part. Installation is really pretty easy. If you have any questions, you can go to symantec.com/business/support and download the hardware compatibility list, HCL, or software compatibility list, SCL, and there's also a best practices document that talks about the rights that your service accounts will need. To do this installation, you just simply run the file browser.exe that's on the DVD. If you have it set to autoplay, the installation screens will come up automatically. So you can do either one. The service account you do need to take into account the service account. Backup Exec works best if you are in a domain. You can cross domains. So if I am a service provider, I can back up multiple domains. I'm going to have rights in all those domains. And you can just back up work groups. If you are installed on Microsoft Small Business Server, the account must be administrator. And that is the local administrator. It is a Microsoft best practice that no account have a blank password. No, they don't want you to have blank passwords. That's not a good idea in Windows. When we do this installation, what you're seeing on the slide is the default paths. Where you see the ... that means C:\program files Symantec backup exec. When you do this installation, the catalogs directory will be created, but it will not be populated yet. The database goes into the data directory that you see listed here. There are 2 files that are associated with the database. They are bedb_dat.mdf, that's the SQL device for the database, and bedb_log.ldf is the transaction log. Once Backup Exec has been installed for one whole day, by default it will create its own backup of its database, and it will be in that same directory. That backup will be called, the name of the file is bedb.back. So all of these are the default locations. You can change these defaults. During the installation, you can change the default of the database, And after the installation, you can change the location of the catalogs. It is best not to have catalogs on the C drive. That's the default location for them, though. The license file will be created for you automatically if you type in the license numbers, or you can import the SLF that Symantec sends you as part of your email. If you're on Server 2008 and newer, that license file will be under Program Data, Symantec Shared/Licenses. If you're on Windows 2003 or older, it will be under Program Files, Symantec Shared Licenses. Older versions of Backup Exec used to put this in the Windows directory. So it depends on if you're doing an upgrade where your old version is. If you are using Backup Exec 2010 and you are upgrading to 2012, you must still have a new license file, a new SLF or new license keys to put in. So you can change some of these paths after the fact. The installation does log itself, and it creates this installation log in backupinst2012.htm. It will give you a reason if it has trouble with the installation. That you see the paths listed on the slide here for where that installation will be. So if you do have any trouble with the installation, which is rare, you can contact tech support for help with these logs and help with the installation. So before we do this installation, you do have to be on Server 2003 or newer. If you are backing up 64-bit, it is a best idea. It is recommended that you be on 64-bit hardware. If you are going to do Backup Exchange 2010, Hyper-V, or you want to use data deduplication, it is required that your backup server be 64-bit. And then you can also push all of Backup Exec to any server, particularly if you're in a central admin server environment. So once I get my case server up, my central admin server up, I can push Backup Exec as a whole out to the managed servers that are responsible for running those jobs. You see the path to where you can go to download the hardware compatibility list or the software compatibility list. Operating system requirements, Server 2003 or newer. We no longer support Server 2000 as a host for Backup Exec itself. So I cannot install Backup Exec on anything that's running Server Core, that's 2003 or 2008 Server Core, or anything in the Server 2000 family. You must be in SQL Express 2005 Service Pack 4 or newer. And we do support SQL Server 2008. So if you choose to redirect the Backup Exec database to a fully licensed SQL Server, you can do that. As far as basic hardware components, backup is all about input-output. Backup is very data intensive. That's really all the backup server is responsible for, is moving data around. The faster your processor, the more memory you have, the better backups will run. It's just a general rule for backups. There's not much getting around that backups are very I/O intensive. So a fast processor is a good idea. Memory, when we talk about memory for Backup Exec, we're always talking about free memory. This is the memory above what the operating system needs. So if my Backup Exec server is 2008 R2, then the operating system needs 2 gigs all by itself. Above that, you need at least half a gig for Backup Exec. We recommend 2 gigs for Backup Exec. So if you are meeting minimum recommendations, you would have a total of 4 gigs in that server. 2 for the OS and 2 for Backup Exec. If this is a central admin server, we recommend, again, at least 1 gig above what the OS needs, and 2 gigs is even better. For central admin server, the more memory you can give it, the better it's going to run. Right, backup is all about I/O. If you're going to do a semantic recovery disk, that requires about 1 gig. It loads WinPE into memory, so that does require memory. If you're doing data deduplication, the memory requirements are even greater. Data deduplication requires 1.5 gigs per terabyte of storage. So I must have a minimum of 8 gigs in the system above what the OS needs. So if I want to do data deduplication and I'm running on server 2008 R2, I have to have at least 10 gigs of memory in that server. 2 gigs for the OS and 8 gigs for backup exec. If you are running more than 5 terabytes of storage for data deduplication, you will need to add 1.5 gigs per terabyte. So if I wanted to have 10 gigs of storage, I'm going to have a minimum of 18 gigs of memory on that server. 2 for the OS and 8 gigs of memory for every 5 terabytes of storage space for data deduplication. Backup exec itself is going to occupy about 1.5 gigs, give or take, of space on the hard drive. This is before the database is populated and before the catalogs are populated. So populating the database and the catalogs will require extra disk space. If you are installing all the options, it's give or take 2.5 gigs of space on the hard drive. SQL Express itself requires just under 0.5 gig of space. You have to have room to let the database grow and room for the catalogs. Catalogs, truthfully, are relatively small compared to many backup products, and it will depend on how long you keep your data. Catalogs are not overwritten until the media is overwritten. So if I am writing backups to tape and I store tapes off-site, that catalog will exist on my server until I bring the tape back and overwrite it, and then it will be overwritten. So if you're keeping tapes off-site for long periods of time, you will have a much larger catalog than someone who is just writing backups to disk and reusing the disk space. So catalogs will vary based on how much data you're backing up and how long you're keeping that data and where you're keeping the data. We highly encourage you to have a disk-based storage somewhere. This could be a NAS device or a SAN device, but this version of Backup Exec, we recommend that all backups go to disk, and if you want to write to tape, then you would duplicate from disk to tape at any time that's convenient for you. So disk-based storage is important for this version of the product. Can be local to the Backup Exec server, can be a NAS or a SAN device, can be a Samba device. Other requirements, the computer host name needs to be ANSI characters. This is standard English language characters. So characters such as the Spanish N with the tilde over it is a non-ANSI character. Your host name needs to have straight ANSI characters in it. You do need to have Windows security settings so that Backup Exec is allowed to run for both read and writes. One of the issues that you need to check here is if I'm going to push the remote agent, then the Windows firewall needs to be turned off, which you can do with group policy, just for the length of time it takes to get the agent on that machine, and then you can re-enable the Windows firewall. Third-party software products, the ports need to be configured so that Backup Exec can run. The example that I'll use here is semantic endpoint protection, that you can configure semantic endpoint protection so that your backups will fail, and that's not a good idea. So you do need to make sure that everything is set so that your backups will be successful. I do have to make sure that my hardware devices are properly installed. For the most part, the drivers will be installed as part of the installation, so drivers are not as essential as the hardware itself. and I have to have an unencrypted, uncompressed drive for the SQL Express database location that you've chosen during this installation. If I want to push all of Backup Exec remotely, you can do that. File and printer sharing must be on. The firewall has to allow for the ports that you see listed in the slide. And I have to allow remote administration. As far as memory goes, you have to have WMI enabled. And you see on the far right of this slide the requirements for SEP if you're using semantic endpoint protection, that it needs to share files and printers, and that is turned off by default. So in order for me to push Backup Exec, that needs to be turned on or enabled. As part of my pre-installation, the first thing I need to do is install my storage devices. There is a utility that you can run for Backup Exec known as the Environment Check utility. What this does is it prevents Backup Exec from doing an installation and then saying, oh, wait, you have the wrong version of something, and having to remove the files. So this Environment Check utility simply checks to make sure that everything is correct before we copy any files. You can run this at any time. We'll take a look at it here in a moment, and you can rerun it if you don't meet minimum requirements. So you do want to run it, make sure everything is okay, make sure that your Windows security settings are set so that you can read and write and pass through the firewall, unencrypted, uncompressed drive for the SQL database, make sure the host name is fully ANSI. If you are using a non-English version of Backup Exec and you want the database to also be a non-English version, you will have to download that SQL Express installation or point Backup Exec at an existing SQL installation. Make sure all Windows applications are closed, and then you are ready to run this installation. The Environment Check utility is one of the first things that runs. It checks to make sure that the machine meets at least minimum requirements. When you run the Environment Check utility, if you get a green circle with a check mark in it, that means everything is good and you can continue the installation. If you get a yellow triangle with an exclamation mark, it means that you may have a problem, but not necessarily a stop the presses problem. If you do have a problem, next to the problem will be a hyperlink, and Backup Exec will try to fix it if it can. The next level problem up is a red circle with an X in the middle of it. With either a red circle or a yellow triangle, you can click the link next to it, and Backup Exec will try to resolve the issue if it can. For example, you may need to install .NET. Some problems it can't fix. If you don't have enough memory, you're going to get a red X, but there's no hyperlink that will just automatically install memory in your server. So you're going to have to fix anything that's a red X and finish that installation. You can rerun the Environment Check utility at any time. So if you had to go fix something, you can make sure that it now meets the minimum requirements. Then the next screen that comes up is going to be the installation screen. You can run through either a typical or a custom. As far as the installation goes, we're going to tell it to install Backup Exec, and in this first instance we're going to run through a typical installation. It will automatically run the Environment Check utility for you at this point, and you could still go fix anything you want. The next screen that comes up is in the lower right of this slide, and this is where you can type in your serial numbers if you choose to. So you would have to type in a serial number for the core product, any agents or options that you wish to install, and any additional things like the library expansion option. It would be far easier just to import from file. It's the button on the top row on the right, and you would have to, it's going to ask you for the location for your SLF, your semantic license file, and you can just import that at this point. And that would list all the agents and options that you have purchased. If you install Backup Exec without a license key at all, it becomes a 60-day evaluation version. So it runs for 60 days, and that's a counter in the registry. So at the end of 60 days, if you backdate the server, the counter has still hit 60. So it won't help. So if you install this as without a license key at all, it will run for 60 days. So once you get your licensing in, you click Next. You have to provide it with the credentials for the service account. This is the account that Backup Exec will use to both read on the backup side and write on the restore side. So this should be an account that has read and write rights to as many of the resources as possible in your environment. Ideally, this account should be a member of domain admins, but that's not required. It just needs to have read and write rights to wherever you need to go. You can also change the path. This is where the binaries will be. It is recommended that you leave this path at default if at all possible. When you click the Next button, it will give you a synopsis of everything that you're about to do, and then the installation will begin. If you would like to redirect things like the database, you have to do a custom installation. So if I choose to do a custom installation, or you want to install additional options or push agents, you can do it from either the custom installation screen we just saw, or if you have Backup Exec already installed, you can click on the Backup Exec button in the console in the upper left corner and choose Installation and Licensing. Either way, you'll come into the screen that's in the lower right of this slide that allows you to choose what options and agents you wish to install. So you tick the checkbox for the things that you wish to install, click Next, and it will allow you then to redirect the database. So I can redirect the database even if it's SQL Express so that it installs somewhere besides the C drive. The default path is what you see on the screen. So I can redirect to SQL Express by clicking the Browse button. If I want Backup Exec to be installed on a fully licensed SQL server, I simply choose the second radio button down, and it will then prompt you for the SQL server to which you want this install to be sent. Notice that it is SQL Server 2005, Service Pack 4 or later. SQL Server 2005, SP4 or newer is required. It will ask you about tape device drivers. The best practice is to use semantic drivers. And if you have any doubt about drivers, use semantic drivers. And if there are Windows drivers installed, use semantic drivers. The semantic drivers accept a much larger code base than the Windows drivers do. And this becomes difficult to troubleshoot down the road because if you're using Windows drivers, what you will get is very sporadic behavior. The backups will run and then sporadically they'll fail. So if you use the semantic drivers, you get away from that. Typically this is tape device drivers. Typically if you're doing backup to disk, you don't need any drivers at all. You can also install the console wherever you want the console to be. By default, when you install Backup Exec, there will be a console on the server, but I can install the console all by itself on any machine where I work every day. And then I can open that console and connect to the Backup Exec server without the need to remote into that server. So if I want to do that, the console installation on the machine where I sit every day, I can do that as well. So I just choose to do a local installation and install the remote administration console. And you tell it where you want it to be. It shows the default paths. When you bring up the remote administrator console on the machine where you sit every day, you're going to have to tell it to connect to a Backup Exec server. And then it will ask for the credentials, who has rights to connect to that server. So you'll need to enter the rights. You can only connect to one server at a time. So if you're managing multiple Backup Exec servers that are not in a central admin configuration, you could connect to each one of those servers one at a time. If you do have a central admin server, you can still use the remote console, but you can then connect to the central admin server and manage all of your Backup Exec servers from one screen. Licensing, we've talked about. that when you type in a license key for the core product, what that includes is the Open File Manager. That was not always true with Backup Exec in the past, so you do get the Open File Manager now. You have to type in separate license keys for the agents, the options, and if you have more than one tape drive in a robotic library, you must have a license key for the library expansion option for every drive greater than 1. So if I have a library that has 4 tape drives in it, I would have to have the core license key for Backup Exec plus 3 license keys for the library expansion option. That's true whether it's a physical tape library or a virtual tape library. If it's a virtual tape library, you could purchase the VTL unlimited license key instead of the library expansion option license key. When you type the license keys in, it will create a file with an SLF extension for you, or you could just import the SLF on this screen. If you did the import, it will show you what all your licensing is and what you have licensed. If you don't type anything in here or import at all, it becomes a 60-day eval. I can also select what products I wish to install. I get one SLF in many cases, even though I have multiple Backup Exec servers. And some servers, I may not want them to run the agent for SQL. I may have a server that's going to back up Exchange and a different server that's going to back up SQL. So in Backup Exec now, it's all one agent for applications and databases, but I may not need, I would have to purchase 2 of those. And in my example, I would want to install 1 each on those servers. So you do have to watch these checkboxes to make sure that you're installing the licensing that you intend to use. Symantec will email you the SLF file. It is a best practice to keep the ISO that you use to do this installation and the SLF file in your disaster recovery kit, so that in a worst case scenario, if you had to recover your Backup Exec server, you could do so very quickly by having the installation files and the SLF handy. If you type in the license keys, the SLF for you will be created in the paths that you see on this screen. Once you get it installed, it is a good idea to reboot. It is not required, but it is a good idea. You've installed several services, and now you're ready to launch Backup Exec 2012. The first time you open it, you will come into the console. This is where you create all of your jobs, and you can do all of your restores. The top section of the console with the gray background is your tabs. The first button there is your Backup Exec button. This works very much like the Microsoft buttons if you're used to using Word or PowerPoint. It's the general Save As place where you can get to all of these settings for Backup Exec. Then the main tabs that you have are Home, Backup and Restore, Storage, and Reports. The next row down is the ribbon. And this is going to be specific to the tab that you have chosen. So in the screenshot here, we have Backup and Restore, and then you have in the ribbon, you have a button for backup and a button for one-time backup. So the ribbon is going to change depending on which tab you have selected. The selection pane will also change depending on what you have selected. At the very bottom, you see the status bar. This shows me to which backup server I am connected, if there are any alerts that are active, how the status of my jobs, and the very last on the right is the connection to the SQL database. And it should be a green arrow as it is in this screen, so you know your SQL database is up and running properly. If I click on the Home button, you'll come to a screen that is a synopsis of how your Backup Exec server is doing. You have different options for laying it out. The default is 2 columns. Any of these pieces that you see with the little chevrons and the full screen and the X, you can move around. So you can click on these and move them around. I'm interested in, I don't really care about licensing anymore, so I can make that whole screen go away. So this is completely customized to what you're interested in seeing, this is a great screen to leave up because you can move this around and look at the status of all of your backups in a simple click and go. So you come in the morning, you see that your backup jobs are okay, or I have one or two that have a problem, I can go check on those and be done and move on to my next project. So you can customize this home page to whatever suits you and which pieces you're most interested in. The Backup and Restore tab in BE 2012 replaces two different tabs that existed in Backup Exec 2010, and those are the Job Setup and the Job Monitor. So it's been very much simplified. The other big difference is that it is displayed to you from a server-centric point of view. In older versions of Backup Exec, we gave you the display based on the jobs. So now we give you the display based on what you're more interested in seeing, and that is, am I backing up my servers? So it's a very different perspective than it's been in the past. In the upper left-hand corner, you have the button for Standard, which displays your servers and the associated backups with an extended display. It's fairly wide, and it will show you, you'll see 7 days of backups. The current day is always on the far right. If you have a very long list of servers that you are backing up, it would take some time to scroll down this screen. So the next button below Standard is Compact, and it shows you the list of servers in a single line. So you'll see twice as many servers on the screen. There are also filters that you can filter, so I show me only SQL servers or show me only Exchange servers. You can also create groups of your servers. So I can create a group for all my SQL servers or a group for all my Exchange servers, and I can apply a backup scenario to that entire group of servers. And we'll talk about how to create those groups, which are displayed on the left. If you double click on any server that you have on your list, or if you click on the whole group of servers on the right, there is a button where you can select a server. You'll go into details for that server. And what you will see on the left is a listing of, the first thing on the list is jobs, and it will show you all the jobs that are associated with that server. You can double click on any one of those jobs to get the details of the jobs. The next button down is Job History, and this is where you would see the log files for that particular job. So I can see that a job completed successfully or completed with exceptions, and I can go see what the exceptions are in that job log. We're going to go through the rest of these as we go through the rest of the class in more detail as far as backup sets, alerts, credentials, and properties. But it does show you to which server you are looking at the properties. So this screen is very much like the old job setup screen in older versions of Backup Exec. The next tab over is the Storage tab. This tab replaces at least two screens from older versions of Backup Exec that were devices and a separate screen for media. It's all condensed onto one screen now. If you had Backup Exec 2010 and you had Central Admin Server, that you had yet a third tab that is also included on this Storage tab now. So this shows me all of my disk storage, all of my tape storage, and all of the media that's associated with that all on one screen. One of the new things that's on this screen that we've never had in the past is the disk storage capacity section that shows you how much of your disk storage is being used, how much is available, and there's tracking for you that once you've run backups for a length of time will tell you how much space you have for future backups. So we'll take a look at that as we go through the course. If I double click on any storage device, I can go into the details for that device, and it will show me what jobs are being written to that device, the backup sets that are on that device, and any media that's associated with that device. It will also show me device properties, and we'll take a look at that when in the lesson for configuring storage devices. I can sort and filter. You can create your own filters. So in this case, we're looking at backup and restore, and I want to see all the jobs that either failed or backed up with exceptions. So I can just show me those. I don't need to see that they were successful. I'm very happy that they were successful, but all I need to do is troubleshoot the ones that had problems. So you can simplify these screens even further. The reports view gives me a listing of all the reports that are available. There are several that are there by default, and you can also create your own reports. Reports are related to the media, how much disk storage space are you using, how efficient is your data deduplication, where did your tapes go? Once you took them out of the library, if you have physical tapes, did you send them to the offsite storage facility, and when are they supposed to return to you for overwrite? There are reports for all of that. Under the Backup Exec button at the top of the screen, this replaces the screenshot that you see here where we've gone to the Backup Exec button, configuration and settings. This replaces the old tools options that existed in Backup Exec 2010. So if you're used to going to tools options to set the configuration of how Backup Exec runs, you now go to the Backup Exec button. Everything is there that used to be in the other location. In user testing, Symantec has done a great deal of usability testing with this version of Backup Exec, and what we have found is users who came from older versions of the product, for about the first 15 or 20 minutes of using this new version, find themselves a little bit confused because things have moved. We've actually tested timing, and after about 15 or 20 minutes, you start to understand that this is a very intuitive interface. And if you just click around, you'll find what you're after. So most of the user comments that we have gotten, especially on this Backup Exec button related, have been very positive once people have gotten through the initial shock of, where did it go? And why did they move it? It's much easier to use than it's been in the past. Updating Backup Exec. This is how we send out patches and hot fixes to you. The default is that we will send out patches and hot fixes to you using Symantec Live Update. This is the same live update that Symantec Endpoint Protection has used for years. So if my Backup Exec server has access to the internet, it will go out on a schedule that you can set to the Symantec servers and download any patches or hot fixes. I can also set up a master, if you will, a master or internal live update server that will go out to the internet. For example, you might want to put this in a DMZ that will go out to the internet and download any Symantec updates for any Symantec products in your environment, and all of your product servers can then get their updates from that internal server. Other Symantec products that use Live Update include Symantec Endpoint Protection, Backup Exec, and the Ghost Solution Suite. So if I have those, I can set up one server that behaves similarly to a Windows System Update server or WSUS server. So I have one server going out to the internet to get patches and hot fixes, and then all of the servers underneath that need to get their patches can get it from there. This is about a 2-page knowledge base article that tells you how to set this up. So you're welcome to go out and set it up. It's not difficult at all to set up that internal Live Update server. To configure Live Update, you can simply go to Settings, Control Panel, Symantec Live Update, and set it up for interactive or express. The default for Backup Exec, I believe, is interactive mode. This is not nearly as critical for Backup Exec as it is for example, Symantec Endpoint Protection. I can tell Backup Exec to just run an update. So if I just right-click on a server, I can tell it to run an update, and Live Update will run. It will give you information about the patch or the hotfix that is being downloaded, and that patch or hotfix is then advertised out to other Backup Exec servers in your environment. So it does also allow other machines to see that there is a patch or a hotfix available. You can also schedule when the automatic updates run. So if I go to the Backup Exec button, Configuration and Settings, Backup Exec Settings, in that screen come down to Live Update, and you can set the schedule for when it will query for patches and hotfixes. Weekly is plenty for Backup Exec. This is not like semantic endpoint protection that you have to get DAT files on a regular basis. This is new to this version of the product. In previous versions of Backup Exec, if we sent out updates to the remote agent, we expected you to read the release notes and figure that out and push it yourself. In this version of the product, you can right-click on any server that you're backing up and tell it to send an update to that server for the remote agent itself. So you're pushing out updates to the remote agent to those servers. You can also schedule installations of updates for the remote agent on those servers. Upgrading to Backup Exec 2012. This is if you have older versions of the product. The first thing that I will mention here is typically people are running older versions of Backup Exec on 32-bit hardware. And if you are wanting to do data deduplication, or you're backing up Hyper-V or Exchange 2010, you need to be on 64-bit hardware. So an upgrade is a little bit more of a challenge because you're going to have to change not only the server hardware itself, but the operating system on which it runs in many cases. So let's talk about how you do straightforward upgrades, and then we'll talk about special situations. The interface has changed greatly. It's resource-centric. It's very simplified, but this impacts the jobs that you used to have. In older versions of Backup Exec, you could have standalone jobs and policies that were all tied to selection lists. You had many pieces, and with this version of the product, we've simplified what you see. So as we import those standalone jobs, they now become backup definitions. One of the things to understand here is that scheduling is going to have to change slightly, and we'll give it as close a schedule as we possibly can. But most of your schedules will need to be checked, that when you upgrade from one version to another, you'll need to check your schedules. If you had jobs that contain multiple servers, that will be split into multiple jobs. But again, this version of Backup Exec doesn't show you jobs. It shows you servers. So if you look at the server, you'll see that's being backed up. If you drill down into it, you'll see the separate jobs. So each job is only going to contain one server or one database application. That's different than the old version, but again, we show it to you at a server level rather than a job level. If you had non-recurring jobs, I had a backup one time, that's going to be converted to a definition, but it will not be scheduled to run. So you'll need to check the schedules. This is the first version in some time that we have seen a considerable change to the schema of the Backup Exec database. So with the data lifecycle management and the differences in how we manage data and how we create jobs, there is quite a bit of change going on from your older database into this database. It is a really good idea to have a backup of your old database somewhere where you can lay your hands on it before you do this upgrade. After the upgrade completes, you will probably have more jobs than you've had in the past. In the past, it was possible to set Backup Exec up so that it was one job that backed up 4 servers or more. In this version of the product, if you had a job that backed up 4 servers, it will now be 4 jobs. Again, we don't show that to you though. We're looking at the servers. So you go look at the server and just make sure that it is backing things up. The schedules will be as close as they could be as we did this translation. Restore jobs are not transferred over. Restore jobs are simply removed. I can upgrade from Semantic Backup Exec 2.5, Semantic Backup Exec 2010, 2010 R2, and 2010 R3. So that's 2 versions back. All right, since we're at 2012. Those I can simply upgrade over the top if I choose to. Upgrading over the top also assumes that you're going to stay on the same hardware. So that will upgrade your database. If you're running older versions of Backup Exec, you'll need to upgrade to 2012. So if you're at Backup Exec 11D or 12, you would have to upgrade to 12.5 or newer before you could upgrade to 2012. Existing definitions, job definitions, configurations will all be automatically converted. We'll give you a report about how the jobs were migrated. Rolling upgrades are supported, and what we mean by rolling upgrades is especially in a central admin server environment. I have a central admin server at the top with several managed Backup Exec servers. You always upgrade from the top down. So I'm going to upgrade my central admin server first, and it can continue to run those managed Backup Exec servers that are further down the pyramid. Over time, they would all need to be the same version, but you may have to upgrade them at separate maintenance cycles, so we allow you to do that. So that's a rolling upgrade. The bottom of the pyramid is the remote agent for all the machines that you're backing up, and again, we do support rolling upgrades for that, in that an older agent can talk to a newer server. So again, I can push the newer agent and upgrade that agent on the regular maintenance cycle for that server. I don't have to do it all at once. So we do support the remote agent from Backup Exec 12.5 and later, and we can still back it up. The remote console can manage Backup Exec 2010, 2010 R2, and 2010 R3 along with 2012. Notice that it's 1 version back. So if I'm running the remote console, I can still manage and connect to multiple Backup Exec servers. It's that the remote console for 2012 cannot manage Backup Exec 12.5. You will get a report that shows how your data was migrated to the new database. So we have talked about how to install Backup Exec, how to use the console, and how to update using Live Update Backup Exec, and how to upgrade to Backup Exec 2012.